Today we are going to be talking about how my reading went in the month of March 2023. And February was just such an iconic month that March inevitably was not going to be as good. I kind of knew that. And it wasn't. I mean, if you look at the numbers, which we'll start doing here in a second, it was a perfectly fine reading month, but it was very steady in quality. There weren't a ton of things that felt like they really stood out either way. Now, there were a couple of standouts in either direction, which we will talk about. But yeah, overall, kind of like good, solid, fine. I've definitely lost some steam towards the end of the month. But with that being said, let's start with my stats and challenges, and then we will talk about my hits, my surprises, and my disappointments for the month of March. Let's dive in. So in March, I read a total of 27 books, 21 of which were from my TBR, 6 of which I did not own. I read a total of 8,389 pages for an average book length of 310 pages. The average age of book I read was 3 years, and the average amount of time a book had been on my TBR was 5 months. I paid for 48% of the books that I read, and the average cost to me was $48.11. No, that's not right. That's a lot. $8.11. Could you imagine the average cost of a book being $48.11? Good God. No. Genre-wise, a slightly more skewed towards speculative month than maybe normal because I had the biggest category as fantasy. So I read 7 fantasy novels, a little bit of horror, a little bit of romance, a little sci-fi, a little nonfiction and mystery, just a little sprinkling of everything. Typical genre mix with fantasy and speculative romance being at the top. So overall speculativeness was the theme for this month. And then average rating wise, very strong, an average rating of 3.51 stars. And we definitely had, like I said, an outlier in either direction, and then a lot of 4 stars as sort of the peak of our bell curve. So definitely go check out my mid-month check-in because in that video I talked about a lot of books that I read in the first half of the month. Like I got into a lot of them because I knew I wasn't going to talk about them in another video. So there's a lot of information in there about arcs in particular that I read this month. So I recommend you going to look at that. In terms of other challenges, the only other arc I read this month was Silver Nitrate, which I gave 4 stars by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. I read that as a part of my trying a new author video, so you can go check that out. The book review, there's no specific spoilers in that. There's a lot of discussion about like themes and kind of what her vibe is. But in the middle, I also have book reviews for Beautiful Ones, which was my favorite. This was the strongest of the 3. This is like verging on 4.5, but this is 4 stars. Gods of Jade and Shadow, which I also gave 4 stars to. And then Silver Nitrate, which comes out, I think, in July or August, sometime in the summer. I will say my biggest critique of Silver Nitrate is that it's really slow, like, getting going. The first quarter of that, I honestly think could have and should have been trimmed down to, like, less than half of what it is. So it's very slow getting going, but once you get into it, it's a very fun horror story about dark magic and Mexican 1960s cinema. So if that's appealing to you, I recommend. I think that it's once you get past that first quarter, it was the most commercially appealing of the ones I've read from her. So look for that. My Patreon book club pick was An Unwanted Guest, which I tabbed up because I definitely think this is a strong comp title to the book that I'm writing right now. So wanted to see kind of how it was structured. And yeah, it was an interesting finding of how she does the pacing, and kind of feeling like it's a little bit at the expense of the character work and the writing. So anyway, this was an interesting thing for me to read with that lens. The other challenge that I'll mention, because I'm not going to talk about any more of these books in more detail, except for one, which is in the surprise section, is I read a bunch of books that just got recommended to me from social media with mixed success, but overall I think pretty good. I'm still in the middle of Apollo's Angels, which I'm still very much enjoying. This was the big standout, but I'll talk to you guys about that when I finish it. I DNF'd The Morning Star and Barrow of Winter, but you know, c'est la vie. You win some, you lose some. And then I very much enjoyed Hither Page and Gunpowder Alchemy. These are 2 authors I've been meaning to read, and so it was exciting to take my first kind of steps with them. So check out that video for full thoughts. And then, oh, the other challenge was my April Fool's Day collab, which we'll talk more about here in a little bit, but I read Verity by Colleen Hoover and Heartstopper by Alice Oseman, and Heartstopper I thought was very charming. Verity, we'll talk about it. Okay, I think that's all the challenges, so let's start with disappointments, and I have two that I want to mention. The first being Spring's Arcana by Lilith St. Crow. This was a disappointment because, not because it's bad, but because the writing in this really didn't work for me. So this was an art kindly sent to me from Tor, which I very much appreciated, but unfortunately, the writing in this is too self-serious for an urban fantasy, for my taste. I like it to be a little more wry or kind of having some self-awareness or some easy breezy cynicism, something like that. And this one, I just felt like was taking itself really seriously, which was not a tone that I could get into. But if that sounds appealing to you, which I know it will to many people because, you know, tastes vary, then I would recommend this. It is the first in a duology that is urban fantasy and sort of the magic system is based in Russian gods. So if that sounds appealing to you, then I would recommend you giving this a try when it comes out, I believe in May. Yeah, in May. But unfortunately for me, it just wasn't the vibe. The other disappointment is In the Lives of Puppets by TJ Klune, which was not bad. I gave it 3 stars. Like, I think it's fine. But the reason why I found it to be disappointing was because I keep expecting TJ Klune to deliver on some level of coziness. And I think maybe with this book, I need to just let that expectation go because it's been 2 in a row that just really haven't done that. So I think in my mind, I'm like, okay, I need to start thinking of The House in the Cerulean Sea as more of a one-off in terms of its tone. In the Lives of Puppets is not as character-driven as I was wanting it to be. It does have a couple of like distinctive characters, so I should just give you the setup. The setup of this is, it is sort of like a take on Pinocchio, but in a world of automatons. Like, it's like a dystopian automaton robot world. And in it, we have a human boy who is like the Pinocchio. So it's sort of, you know, the idea of puppets versus humans that we get in the original Pinocchio, a little bit of like a switch up. There's like a MLM queer romance element. So like that is there. And I think that was fine. It's a very, I don't even know how to explain it. It was fine. That's why I gave it 3 stars. It was fine, but it wasn't giving me what I was hoping it was going to give me. It wasn't distinctive enough. I think that some of the ideas about AI and like, I think ultimately sort of climate change were interesting ideas. They were perfectly well executed. This just didn't have that X factor that I keep wanting from him and keep not getting. So I don't know. I think that people will enjoy it. Like, I think it's an enjoyable book. I don't have anything like bad per se to say about it. I think that this is a disappointment purely because of where my expectations were versus what the book ended up being like. And I don't know whose fault that is. It's probably no one's fault. It's just, it is what it is. And yeah, so a little disappointed, but I don't want to like put anyone off from the book because I do think it's a strong book. It's just not what I was wanting from it. So hopefully that helps you gauge your expectations better than I did. Maybe that's the takeaway. Okay, then I have 2 surprises. One is good and one is very bad. So The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy by Megan Bannon is a very good surprise. So I was looking for some coziness, which I do think that I mostly got, which yay, but it was coziness in the context of what I would again describe as definitely a fantasy romance. I am continuing to search for something that might have a romantic element, but is not what I would otherwise label as a fantasy romance. Like, I keep looking for that and they are hard to find. So like Legends and Lattes, the reason why that one to me does feel more like it is the cozy fantasy is, yes, there is a romantic element, but it's not the main plot line. And I keep looking for that. Anyway, so I would call this a fantasy romance. And I think it had a lot of very cozy elements to it, even though it is literally about death. I mean, it's The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy. So it's about zombies and death, but somehow it's also still cozy. I don't know. I've seen some people say that the death part kept it from being cozy for them. But for me, it still was. So the setup is, the reason I put this as a surprise is this is You've Got Mail, which is one of my all-time favorite movies. And I was so excited to realize that that was like the plot basis for this. So we have Mercy, who is in a family undertaking business, a la The Shop Around the Corner. And Hart is a frontier demigod sheriff who his job is to like go hunt down the zombies that are on the kind of fringes of this frontier town. And so he has to bring the bodies somewhere, so that's how they meet. They get off on really the wrong foot and they just keep being on the wrong foot. But he's really lonely, and one day he writes this letter and it ends up going to her, and love ensues from there. I just thought that this was, it surprised me because I wasn't expecting the You've Got Mail component. And I should say, this is very clearly an homage to it. There are literally some lines in here that I'm like, that's from the movie, from the Meg Ryan, Tom Hanks version of this Shop Around the Corner story. Like, there are some literal parallels there. And I would say that it adheres fairly closely to that, at least in the beginning. But I will say, if you don't want something, like, I know it off-puts some people for it to be a beat-by-beat retelling, and I would not say that that's what this is. It does ultimately kind of go on its own path. And if you can't tell from the world description setup, it's a wacky world, so it goes in some other directions. But I thought that this handled the love story really well. The other thing that keeps it from feeling fully cozy is that they go to Pound Town fully. So if that's a good or a bad thing to you, you're definitely going to get some of that action in here. And it charts its own path ultimately by the time we get to the end of the book. And I love the world building. I thought it was cool, and I'm always down for a fantasy Western, which this has. Yeah, this just really worked for me, and I was expecting to enjoy it, but I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it, and I was surprised at, it felt like a really distinctive flavor of what it is, and yeah, it just felt different and fun while still very familiar because of its source material. So anyway, I ultimately ended up really enjoying this one, so I'm glad that social media pushed me to pick this up. Then we get to the bad surprise. Verity by Colleen Hoover. Okay. You know what? Actually, I need to eat lunch before I do this, so let me do that because I feel like I need to be fully sustenanced before we get into this discussion. Okay, I am nourished and ready to rumble. Verity I'm putting as a surprise because I am surprised that anyone likes it. That's a little harsh. I think what I was surprised, if you go watch the video, there is a spoiler section and a non-spoiler section, so just FYI. My bottom line on this book is I was expecting to maybe not think it was amazing in its quality, but to at least be entertained by it. And I didn't find it entertaining, and that really surprised me. I was expecting to say like, oh, I don't love, you know, the way that gender is portrayed or the romantic dynamic or whatever, but you know, it's kind of a messy, campy book. I had fun with it. I did not have fun with it. It wasn't entertaining or fun for me, and the writing was so bland. I don't know. I was surprised to discover how unentertaining it was given how popular she is. Like, usually when you have an author who's that popular, you expect, if nothing else, to see what the there is. And in this case, I did not. I gave this 1 star, which is pretty rare for me. And yeah, this was a part of our April Fool's Day collaboration, so definitely go check out all of the creators who participated because there's some highly entertaining videos in there. And if you want to check out my full thoughts, you can go watch my video. But yeah, bottom line, not for me, but not in the ways that I thought it wouldn't be for me, which is what the surprise here is. Okay, and then let's get into a couple of things that I thought stood out and that were hits for me in this month. So, first of all, When the Moon Turns to Blood by Leah Sotilli, I think is how you say this author's last name. I should say that the reason I even picked this up was because I saw her doing a book club discussion on Mormon Stories podcast, so I will try to remember to link to that video in case you guys want to hear a really interesting discussion with her and with the panelists, specifically coming from the context of people who were raised or were Mormon for a good chunk of their lives, which I am/was not. So I thought that was a great conversation, and it intrigued me to pick up the book. And what I really liked about this, so the subtitle is basically about the something to the effect of Chad Daybell, Lori Vallow. In essence, it's a story of a lot of murder in the name of the Lord, which is a fascinating topic always. But particularly what this book does is, I think people who like true crime may not like this book, if that's what you're going to the book for. What I thought this book did a great job of, what I really enjoyed about it, is that it's situating the extremist form of Mormonism that Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell followed in the context of the history of the American West and within the theology and history of Mormonism itself. So I thought that was so well done and really interesting and really hitting my particular interests, which are history, philosophy, theology, cults, messiness, drama. All of the things that I liked, this really highlighted that about this case, which is something that I have been very interested in general. Did I tell you what this case is about? I think I was about to and then got distracted. So there's a lot of murderousness in the wake of Lori Vallow in particular. And she got kind of caught up in a strand of Mormonism that is very fundamentalist, but it's the side of fundamentalist extremist Mormonism that is coming from like the New Age side of things. So there's a lot of, near-death experiences and energy and kind of more the woo-woo version of fundamentalism, as opposed to something like the AUB or the FLDS or the Kingston Clan, like that flavor of Mormon fundamentalism. It's a different strand of it, and it's just very interesting to learn about that strand of it. Think like Denver Sniffer, like you're seeing Jesus and you're having these revelations. So if you're not as interested in kind of that angle on the story, this may not be a book for you, but for me, oh my gosh, I just loved it. I ate it up with a spoon. And I don't know. Maybe this should be a 4.5. I don't know. I think I originally gave it a 4, but it's a very strong 4 verging on 4.5. I'll have to think about that. But yeah, this was just very much up my alley. And if you don't want to read the full book, but any of that sounds interesting, I definitely recommend that episode of Mormon Stories podcast. So anyway, I just really enjoyed that book in general and was delighted to find it kind of hit some of my niche interests very squarely. The biggest hit, the 4.5 star, I come to you once again telling you that I think a lot of you guys are not going to like this book. I think a lot of people will not like this book, but I loved it. So The Last Word by Taylor Adams. I like this better than No Exit because it's completely wackadoo. It is so camp and over the top and very page-turnery. So I should tell you the setup. The setup for this is this woman is house sitting for someone in this rural kind of, I think like lake house, if I'm remembering rightly, beachfront. Okay, yeah, I knew there was water. So she's house sitting for someone at this beachfront home. We get kind of vague allusions to her past, and it's not totally clear what it is she's running from. But her neighbor recommends a book to her, and as she starts to read it, she's like, this is horrible, and she ends up leaving a 1-star review, like a scathing 1-star review. And the author starts replying to her being like, take it down. And she is saying no. And they're going back and forth. And then she starts to have a stalker, and she's suspecting it's the author, but she doesn't know. And she has this relationship with the neighbor, who's this little old man. They're kind of in communication, but they're really the only two people out there. So, and things kind of build from there. The book that this kind of reminds me of in terms of what kind of mystery thriller suspense it is The Writing Retreat. Because it's not a book that I think will be that surprising to people. Like, I think you're going to figure out pretty quickly what is going to happen in the book, but it's about waiting for it to happen. So it's more of a suspense than a thrill, if that makes sense. So it's not that I think people who read in the genre a decent amount, you're gonna know pretty quickly what's what. But waiting for it to happen in the way that it happens, I think is really satisfying. And also, this is so funny. The humor in this really worked for me. And the kind of like hard cuts between, you're getting the like the real time what's happening, and then there's the book version of what's happening, like the person is writing it. The cuts in between that I thought were really dark and funny. And this, I think, is a lot about grief and how you move on from grief, or if you can move on from grief. I don't know. This just really worked for me. This was so entertaining, which is what I have to tell you, that is like number one criteria for me in a book like this. I want to have fun. I had so much fun. I was so entertained. And if it does that, it's going to get at least a 4-star. For me, having those meta-textual elements on top of that took this to the next level. For me, this is so my kind of entertainment. And I had a great time with this. I hope people like it, but I kind of think people might not like it because I don't know how thrilling it is. It's more like it's really high action suspense. So I don't know. We'll find out when more people start reading it, but I kind of suspect people are not gonna like this as much as I did, but I had the best time reading this, and I really appreciate the author sending this to me. Thumbs up, loved it. Utterly wackadoo. So if you're looking for something reasonable, or something you don't have to suspend your disbelief for, don't pick this book up, because it is truly wackadoo, but in the best way, in my opinion. So definitely my biggest hit of the month. And with that, we wrap up a very solid, if not as amazing as last month's reading month. Let me know what you thought about any of the books I talked about. Let me know what some of your hits or disappointments were in March. And yeah, I think that will do it for me. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you're having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!